Hey, good afternoon. This is my CYB610 Topic 3 assignment, the first hack, part 1. Let's move to the next slide. For the enumeration phase of this assignment, this slide is showing here in Kali discovering keyoptrics. What you can't see there is that that input, the command input, was in map, and we're just searching through that that swath of IP addresses right there to discover which one is our keyoptrics box. And you can see that there on the screen it came up with the report as 192.168.56.118, and that's showing the services or the ports that are open and services running on those ports. For the next slide, this was the operating system scan, so that command is nmap switch O, switch capital O, and we ran it against the IP address of the keyoptrics. And from there you can see down at the bottom this is added the operating system information, and that's showing that we're running a Linux kernel 2.4, likely to be Linux 2.4.9 through potentially 2.4.18, and that's all we had additionally for that screen. Continuing on, we did a services scan using command nmap switch lowercase s capital V against the IP address, and you can see the new information that's been added here, the different services that are running on those ports. You can see we've got OpenSSH, Apache, Samba, Apache again, and RPC running on that 32768 port there. OpenSSL as well on 443. And for the next one, this is an aggressive scan. This is a port scan that shows all ports with the operating system detection, version detection, script scanning, and the trace route. And that's the nmap switch P switch capital A running against our IP address. And it's added a lot more information for each port. You can see we've added for port 22 the SSH host keys there. For port 80 you can see potentially risky methods include trace, and it's showing that we're running Apache 1.3.20. You can see on 111 we've got the RPC information showing those different ports between port 111 and 32768. You can see that Samba is running on 139. On port 443, you've got the OpenSSL Apache 1.3.20 again, and then the different states there of that. And so, yeah, just lots of different information that's been added into that scan. These are the additional scans that I chose to use. A verbose scan, which adds more information on what nmap is actually doing when it's running the scan. So that's going to be nmap switch lowercase v against the IP address. The aggressive scan, which is the nmap and the IP address with a switch capital T4. That's an aggressive speed scan. It ran very, very quickly and provided that information there on the ports, the state, and the service. And then a debug scan, which provides similar information to verbose, but it provides even more detail on what nmap is doing, specific lines on the different processes that are running while it's running the scans, and then of course the information about the port state service and some reasoning behind what's going on there. And for that debug scan, that's nmap switch lowercase d. Flaw hypothesis methodology is an analysis and penetration testing technique in which the specifications and documentation for a given system are analyzed, after which a hypothesis of flaws is generated. A list of hypothesized flaws is then prioritized based on the estimated probability that a fault in the system exists. Assuming a flaw does exist, priority will also be based upon the ease of exploiting it and on how damaging the flaw would potentially be. This finalized priority list is then used to direct the rest of the penetration testing operation. And my hypothesis is that the Keyoptrix machine will be vulnerable to buffer overflow attacks due to vulnerabilities associated with outdated or unpatched Apache version 1.3.2 that was discovered during the services scan. And for our vulnerability map here, I basically mapped around the system the different ports that some vulnerabilities were discovered on. OpenSSH presents vulnerabilities on port 22. OpenSSL presents vulnerabilities on port 443. We've got multiple services running on the HTTP port 80. That present different vulnerabilities. The Linux kernel itself, upon research, presented some vulnerabilities. And then Apache 1.3.2, it's running both on ports 80 and 443, have some different vulnerabilities that can be exploited as well. Flaws in the system. On the left-hand side, I actually ran a NICTO scan. NICTO is something that has come up in previous courses before, and I've run it before. Of course, it wasn't called out specifically in this course in the instructions for this assignment, but I did find it interesting just to pull that up and see the different things that that present some vulnerabilities, some misconfigurations, and things like that, running specifically on the HTTP port 80. So the flaws that I found: Apache 1.3.2, it's vulnerable to denial of service attacks, remote code execution, and cross-site scripting. It is an older version. It hasn't been patched here in the Keyoptrix box, so that's a major vulnerability. OpenSSL version 0.9.6b is vulnerable to remote exploit as well as denial of service attacks. Once again, that's an outdated version in need of a patch. The Linux kernel v2.4.9 is vulnerable to denial of service attacks, code execution, and overflows. Once again, it needs to be patched. OpenSSH version 2.9 P2 is vulnerable to denial of service attacks, code execution, and overflow as well. And so many of these flaws can be attributed to being out of date. It's out of date, unpatched software. A lot of the problems that are found within these flaws, the problems that arise, can be fixed with the patches. The up-to-date services do not have many of the flaws that are found in the Keyoptrix box. Some flaws that were discovered on port 80 can also be attributed to misconfiguration. There were some misconfiguration issues with the cross-content type options, the anti-click jacking header, and cross-site scripting protection, and some other things associated with the port 80 as well. That concludes my presentation. This is my references page for the different things that I referenced during this presentation, and that is all. Thank you very much and have a good day.